Well, again, it's a pretty bit of a cliche, but for me, Orkney means the interplay between the land and the sea and the sky. And there's so much sky in Orkney. There's sky from here to here, basically, and because the land is quite flat, you see a lot of sky. The sea is never far away in Orkney. There's hardly anywhere that you can't see the sea in Orkney. A couple of the parishes are inland parishes, but you still see the Hoy Hills, and so you still see quite far across the landscape. For me, the way the land and the sea and the sky interact together is one of the huge joys for me about Orkney. The way you see the cloud shadows going over the landscape, and the way you see the rain coming across from Hoy, and you see it long before it arrives with you. That kind of thing is such a pleasure. When I lived in Glasgow for a long time, I used to find out that when I fell asleep at night, I would be imagining the Orkney landscape, or not imagining it just would come into my head, and it was just about like a landscape of the mind for me. Land and sea, very important in my parents' lives. My mother grew up on a farm, and when I was growing up, I didn't have any sense that it was beautiful. It wasn't until I went away to university and came back in the summer that I thought, oh, look at the colours, the blue and the green, and the blue of the sea, the green land, and blue in between green. And I just was bowled over by it for the first time when I came back. And my father grew up right beside the sea, and he was in and out of the sea all his life, and he used to find a lobster roe that he called lobster berries in under rocks and just scoop it out and eat it when he was in the sea. So there's sort of family myths about the land and the sea as well that are important to me. I've got a picture of my granddad ploughing with horses, and it was a dairy farm he had, so there were always cows around. So that was a big part of my growing up. Stone is also a big part of what I think of in relation to Orkney, and I think it's partly because there are hardly any trees, or no trees to speak of really, although there are more now than there used to be. But stone is very prominent in Orkney. I mean, the highest place you can find in Orkney is the top of the cathedral, and the cathedral stone is very beautiful pink stone. George Mackay-Brown spoke about the roseate glow in St Magnus Cathedral, and it's a lovely kind of gentle pink light that you get in there, but massive big pillars. So that's one kind of stone that's very unusual in Orkney. You don't get an awful lot of buildings built with that stone. That stone came from a bit north of Kirkwall, and the yellow bits of sandstone came from the island of Adie. And then there's the stone that most of the ancient sites in Orkney are built of, and that stone falls very nicely into flat shapes. I mean, you can even see it at the shore, the way the rocks have kind of tipped over, and they're just, you could just about slice them and take them for building. They're so easy to build with. Although they're thin, they're quite thin, so that means that you have to pile a lot on top of one another. But when you look at a dry stone dyke built yesterday and one built 5,000 years ago, it's basically the same technique. So stone is it's all around us in Orkney. When people come here to visit, I usually take them to Skara Brae to see how folk lived 5,000 years ago, and then I take them to a farm museum to see how people lived in the middle of the 20th century, and really there's not a huge difference. It's still stone structures with a fire in the middle, and sometimes stone shelves, even stone beds sometimes. Although by the middle of the 20th century, there were more kind of wooden box beds, that kind of thing. But people are always amazed that really life hadn't changed that much in that time. It can't have been particularly comfortable, although of course there were more materials by the time there was the middle of the 20th century. But my granny's farm, for example, didn't have running water or electricity until the early 1970s. So that's a long time without that. And before that, it was tilly lamps and wet water from the well, that you had to go and haul the water from the well every day and put it into a big metal structure, and then get your water for your tea out of that. So stone, the way it is all across the landscape, the way I kind of use it as sort of talismans. You know, I usually pick up a pebble and I have it to worry in my hand when I'm walking about. And when I worked in Glasgow, I used to have dishes of Orkney stones lying about in rooms. To me, they're just so beautiful, all the different colours. And actually, I know when I'm feeling low, because when I'm feeling low, the stone tends to look kind of all the same colour. But when I'm feeling better in myself, I can see all the different colours in the stone. And that's quite an interesting indicator of mood for me.
For me, the thing that kind of makes you Arcadian, or the thing that is most important, is probably it's an old belief in the spirit of the corn. So the luck of the crop, the luck of the farm was in the corn, and it was very important that it was treated in certain ways, and there would be bits of corn would be left in the corner of a field to feed birds and things like that. There was the belief that the spirit of the corn resided in the first sheaf he took in from the field, and it was kept for Yule time to be fed to the horse and foal. So the land here, the farming, I mean, I'm a farm boy, I was born and brought up on a farm. But it's really the land that makes us. The sea as well, of course, really, really important. But it's the farming here that is so quintessentially Arcadian. And obviously we live very rooted in our heritage as well. But the landscape is part of that. I mean, a lot of the folk tales is about why the landscape looks like it does, where hills came from, you know, how they were made, how lochs were made, stones, you know, erratic stones brought over by glaciation from Norway, was flung by a witch at her daughter who was running off with her boyfriend, you know, in a boat, and missed and landed in Sandy. You know, it's the landscape is told in story, and the landscape shapes us, our worldview. Maybe not as much these days as it did, but that's certainly what was the big influence on my life and on generations of Arcadians. We venerated or feared things like stone circles and mounds where the fairies would live. All the things that are from our archaeology. We knew about the Vikings, we told stories about them. They weren't just stories in books, they were passed down in the oral tradition, but it's the land that we keep coming back to. It's the land that brought the Vikings here in the first place. It's the land that brought people here, the Neolithic farmers here. There were people, hunter-gatherers here long before then, but it's always been land. It's always been the fertility of the land that has brought people here and kept them here.